Just as Bradley lunged again, something unexpected happened. A firm voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." The younger officer finally stepped forward, placing a hand on Bradley's shoulder. For a split second, the older cop hesitated, caught off guard. The crowd fell silent, eyes darting between the officers, unsure of what would happen next. James remained steady, his muscles still tense, ready for whatever came next. He had been in high-pressure situations before, but this wasn't a war zone. At least, it shouldn't have been. His heartbeat was steady, but he could see the uncertainty in the younger officer's face. There was doubt, hesitation, maybe even guilt. Bradley, however, wasn't ready to walk away. He shrugged off his colleague's grip, his pride burning hotter than ever. But before he could act, another voice rang out from the crowd. "I saw everything, and so did my camera." A man stepped forward, holding up his phone. The screen was still recording, the red light blinking. Others followed his lead, raising their devices as well. Bradley's face changed. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. A realization. He wasn't in control of this moment anymore. The weight of dozens of eyes, of recording lenses, of the truth itself, pressed down on him. And suddenly, the power he thought he had didn't feel so certain anymore. Bradley's jaw tightened as he looked around, realizing just how many cameras were pointed at him. The authority he had relied on so confidently just moments ago now felt fragile. He took a slow step back, his face unreadable, but James didn't move. He wasn't the aggressor here, and he wasn't about to act like one. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone watching. The younger officer swallowed hard before finally speaking. "Sir, we should step away." His voice was careful, controlled, but there was a firmness in it. Bradley's eyes flickered toward him, then back to the cameras. He was cornered, not by force, but by truth. His hands curled into fists before he exhaled sharply, turning away as if trying to regain control of the situation. Then, just when it seemed like things were de-escalating, the unexpected happened. A high-ranking officer pushed through the crowd, his uniform crisp, his expression serious. "Officer Bradley," he said, his voice carrying authority, "we need to talk." The crowd murmured as realization set in. This wasn't over. In fact, for Bradley, it was just the beginning. James finally relaxed his stance, his instincts telling him he had won a different kind of battle today, not with his fists, but with patience, resilience, and the undeniable power of the truth. The crowd slowly began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, their phones still recording as Bradley was pulled aside by the senior officer. His face was tense, his arrogance replaced with uncertainty. Whatever conversation was about to happen, it was clear that his actions had consequences. The weight of public scrutiny had shifted the power, and now, for the first time, Bradley wasn't the one in control. James took a deep breath, rolling his shoulders as he looked around. Strangers nodded at him in quiet respect, some offering words of support. He hadn't come here looking for a fight. He had only wanted to go about his day. But sometimes, standing your ground wasn't just about defending yourself. It was about proving that dignity and respect weren't privileges. They were rights. The younger officer hesitated before stepping forward. "I'm sorry about all this," he said, his voice low. James studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Just do better," he replied simply. With that, he turned and walked away, his step steady, his head held high. As he disappeared into the crowd, the city carried on, but something had changed. A lesson had been learned. And for those who had witnessed it, the truth had spoken louder than any words ever could. Maya's patience was razor thin, and if he took one more wrong step, he was about to regret it. Maya's eyes locked onto the officers, reading every move before he made it. His stance, his hand placement, the way his breath quickened. She had seen it all before. He was looking for control, for dominance, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. The younger officer swallowed hard. "Sarge, we should." "Stay out of this," the older cop barked, never breaking eye contact with Maya. His fingers twitched near his belt, but before he could act, she shifted ever so slightly, just enough to let him know she wasn't afraid. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice still calm but edged with warning. The officer scoffed. "You think a fake badge is gonna scare me?" His tone dripped with mockery, but there was something else underneath, uncertainty. Maya saw his hesitation, but she also saw his pride. He was too deep into this now, too determined to prove himself right. Then, without warning, he reached. The second his hand moved, Maya's body reacted. In a blur of movement, she sidestepped, her instincts honed by years of training. The officer stumbled, caught off guard. His shock was clear. He had expected submission. Instead, he had just picked a fight he wasn't ready for. The officer staggered back, his face flashing with disbelief. For the first time that night, he realized he wasn't in control. His grip tightened, his pride wounded, but Maya didn't move. She didn't have to. She had already won the moment he lost his balance. The younger cop took a nervous step forward. "Sarge, maybe we should." "Stay back." The older officer snapped, his voice sharper now, more desperate. His chest rose and fell heavily, his frustration boiling over. Maya could see it clearly now. This wasn't just about her. This man wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like her. He had expected fear, obedience. Instead, he had been outmatched. Then a radio crackled. A voice came through, sharp and direct. "All units be advised. FBI agent Maya Collins is conducting an ongoing federal investigation in your area. To not interfere." The younger officer's face paled. His eyes darted between his partner and Maya, realization setting in. But the older cop, he didn't flinch. He didn't reach for his radio. Instead, something in him shifted. He wasn't backing down. If anything, he looked even more determined. And that's when Maya knew this was far from over. The silence between them was thick, charged with an unspoken challenge. The older officer's jaw clenched, his pride too deep to let this go. The radio call should have ended it, should have made him step back. But instead, his hands curled into fists at his sides. He was still looking for a way to win. Maya stayed still, watching him carefully. Every fiber of her being told her to prepare for his next move. The younger officer shifted nervously, sweat forming at his temple. "Sarge, we need to stop," he said, his voice unsteady. But the older cop ignored him. Instead, he let out a slow breath, as if forcing himself to think. Then, without warning, he straightened his posture, smoothing out his uniform. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "All right," he muttered. "You're FBI." Maya didn't blink. She knew that tone, controlled, measured, but hiding something. "Guess that means you'll be real interested in the footage from my bodycam," he continued. "Should be interesting to see how this all plays out, especially with how aggressive you got." Maya's stomach tightened. There it was, the play he had been waiting for. He wasn't going to fight her physically. He was going to twist the truth. And just like that, she realized this wasn't just about one officer's ego. This was about power, about perception, about the fight she had been battling long before tonight. But what he didn't know, what he could never have predicted, was that Maya had already anticipated this move. And she had a twist of her own. Maya let his words settle, reading between the lines. He thought he had the upper hand now, twisting the truth to protect himself. But what he didn't know was that she had been recording too. Her own body cam, her own audio. The entire encounter, from his first aggressive move to his final threat, was all documented. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small device, and tapped the screen. "You mean footage like this?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The officer's smirk faltered. The younger cop's eyes widened. Maya stepped forward, closing the distance. "See, I know how these things go. I know the game you're playing. But the difference is, I came prepared." The older officer opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His confidence cracked, replaced with something else: uncertainty. He had assumed he was in control, but now the truth was undeniable. The younger cop exhaled, almost relieved. "Sarge, maybe it's time to go," he muttered. Maya held her ground as they backed away. This wasn't just about one night, one officer, or one incident. It was bigger than that. As they drove off, she knew one thing for sure: this fight wasn't over. But tonight, she had won.